64-page vote. I've got 15 amendments in the queue. I want to vote on them. They don't want to vote because they don't want the American people to hear all the bad things about what's going to happen to their health care if this bill passes. And if we do Medicare, what's going to happen is Medicare costs are going to skyrocket, but access is going to go down.
But apparently, I'd ask my colleague from Tennessee, we don't know what we'd be voting on because there's been a whole rewrite of this health care reform here after a year, and we don't even know what the provisions of that bill are except what has been leaked, and apparently my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, with the exception of the majority leader, don't know what it is either.
But the senator could, if he would yield, well, there are some things we could vote on. President Obama outlined some very specific things that ought to be in this bill, and we ought to vote to put them in the bill. What he said he wanted and what this bill presents are two different things. So we ought to vote on making sure everybody has access. We ought to vote on making sure we are under the same plan as everybody else that we're going to put into any new expanded health care coverage. We ought to vote in making sure everybody's treated fairly in this country. We ought to vote on your prescription drug reimportation. We ought to vote. But what we're doing is we're getting the slowdown. We heard that we're obstructing the bill. We're not obstructing the bill. Any other bill that come before this body that had 2,000 pages on it, we'd allot 8 weeks, 10 weeks to debate. And as our colleague from Maine noted, there is not a more complicated subject that will affect more people that this body has ever taken up. And we are trying to squeeze that into 3.5 weeks, and the last 2 weeks we don't know what's in the bill? Time out.
I'd like to thank the senator from Arizona for his great leadership on this issue, and I agree with all here. I'd love for us to continue to discuss this, colloquize, if you will, and vote. I think that's what we need to do all weekend, is talk about this issue and vote. There are numbers of amendments, but Senator, the thing that's interesting to me, you have been for years one of the great champions in this country as it relates to trying to make sure that we live within our means. You have pointed out waste in government, you've pointed out overspending, and what's happened during this Christmas season is, for our friends on the other side of the aisle, Medicare has become the gift that just keeps on giving. I know that when you talked about during your campaign, and all of us have, we need to get Medicare to a point where it's solvent, where seniors actually have the ability to use the benefits later on that now are in place. And so we've all talked about the need to make it solvent, but what does the base of this bill do? It takes $464 billion out of Medicare to create a whole new entitlement. It doesn't even deal with the doc fix that we've said many times. And so now, the reason, by the way, we don't know what this says is the leadership on the other side, this is another one of those yellow Post-its. They're throwing it up on the wall just to see if it works. They're not telling us what the game plan is because they don't yet know whether it works. But what they're hoping to do is to solve a major problem that they have within their caucus, again, by taking from Medicare. I mean, if you think about the fact that Mayo Clinic, which is the model for all of us, won't even take new Medicare patients, and yet our friends on the other side of the aisle are trying to throw a whole new decade of seniors into the plan. What that means is less and less seniors are going to have access to care. I mean, that's what this means. And the other side of the aisle, which I will have to say, based on history, I am surprised, but continue through their policies to throw seniors under the bus. And I do not understand what has happened. This must be about a political victory and not about health care reform. Let me just say one last thing. I know the senator from Texas and South Dakota are here. What we would do is more firmly put in place, again, bag policy. The problem with Medicare today is physicians and providers are paid fees to do more work. So now what we're doing, instead of health care reform, which is what Senator Coburn and all of us have talked about for some time, we're putting in place and cement something that works poorly, that the Mayo Clinic says is damaging to them and their patients. We'd be just putting it in place for even more people. So I want to thank the senator for his leadership. I hope to be with you all weekend discussing amendments that are important, voting on those amendments. I can't imagine a better place for all of us to be.
I thank the senator. Could I just ask a Republican leader again to be very clear that it is his view and that of our entire Republican members of the Senate that we'll stay in for as long as it takes to get this issue resolved, and we are prepared to vote throughout the entire weekend. If the majority leader moves to the omnibus appropriations bills, we will have a conference report. We will certainly have discussion about a bill that has 4,752 earmarks totaling $3.7 billion in it. But we really shouldn't get off this, should we? I'd ask the leader.
I would say to my friend from Arizona, you're entirely correct. I can only quote the majority leader himself, who said we were going to be here this weekend. We expect to be here this weekend, and if he tries to leave, we'll have a vote to adjourn, and I'm confident every Republican will vote against adjourning, because this either is or it isn't. As important as the majority says it is, if it's that important, we need to be here, and more importantly than being here, equally important to being here, is to vote. We tried to get a vote all day yesterday on an amendment by Senator Crapo, and what we heard from the other side is we're working on a side-by-side. That's kind of parliamentary inside talk for delay. We're ready to vote. And, you know, as several of our colleagues have suggested, we keep hearing about these new iterations of this bill. It reminds me at the end of a football game trying to throw a Hail Mary pass. You know, just somehow, some way, find a way to pass this bill. Well, I think it's important for everybody to remember what happens to most Hail Marys. They fall to the ground incomplete. You get the impression that they're far less interested in the substance of the bill than just passing something. When the president came up here last Sunday, he said, make history. Make history? The American people are not asking us to make history by passing this bill. They don't believe it's about the president. They believe it's about the substance. And we're out here prepared to talk about the substance of this measure, offering amendments, and we fully intend to do it for as long as it takes. And as the senator from Arizona has suggested, if the majority leads a conference report, which he's able to do under our process, we'll spend all the time it takes to deal with the conference report.
And may I point out again, as the senator from Maine, Senator Snowe, pointed out, it was highlighted in the Wall Street Journal today, no major reform in the history, modern history of this United States Senate has been enacted without bipartisan support, a reason for us to go back to the drawing board. I know that the senator from Texas has been heavily involved in the issue of hospitalization and the American Hospital Association's reaction to what appears to be an expansion of Medicare.
I thank the senator from Arizona and so pleased that our leader is standing strong to say that nothing should take precedence over our handling of this bill and making sure that it's done right. And that's what the Republicans are trying to do, is make sure this is done right. We talked about the Medicare expansion that is in the purported bill that we haven't seen yet, but that the Democrats appear to be putting forward. And yet we've been spending the week talking about $500 billion in cuts to Medicare. So now we're talking about possibly expanding Medicare. At the same time, we're cutting $500 billion out of the care that Medicare patients would get. One of the amendments, the senator from Arizona mentioned, Oklahoma mentioned that he has 15 amendments pending. I have an amendment, and it would stop the cuts to hospitals. $135 billion in the underlying bill that would cut hospitals' reimbursements from Medicare patients. That's my amendment. Now we're talking about possibly expanding Medicare, and the American Hospital Association put out an alarm. It's an action alert, and it says, Medicare pays hospitals 91 cents for every dollar of care provided. Medicaid pays 88 cents for every dollar provided. So the cuts in Medicaid